Thanks for joining us on another busy night of all things people, power, and politics. This, my friends, is The Pulse. I'm Roop Raj. Ready or not, the political world is about to go into overdrive again. The midterms are right around the corner, and candidates will spend most of 2026 vying for your vote. Once again, all eyes will be right here on Michigan. And there was an election in Tennessee that might give us a look at how the midterms could go. We'll run through some of those results and have political strategist Jason Rowe with us to weigh in on that. Also, SNAP benefits in limbo once again as the Trump administration threatens to withhold them from certain states. The latest on that battle with Detroit News columnist Caitlin Buss, plus business expert Mark Lee on the impact that could have from his angle. But we begin at the White House, where President Trump plans to weaken fuel economy rules for the auto industry. It basically resets Biden-era rules about how far cars need to travel on a gallon of gas and reverses policies to encourage cleaner cars, including electric vehicles. And if you've watched The Pulse, you know there's only one way to tell this story, and that's to go by the numbers. So take a look. The red graph here represents the Biden-era requirements. You see it right here. And that basically set the industry average for light-duty vehicles at a little more than 50 miles per gallon. The Trump administration plans to slash that proposal to around 34.5 miles per gallon. Environmental experts say this move is a problem because burning gas is a huge contributor to global warming. But the president says this is all about affordability.
Department of Transportation will rescind the Biden fuel economy prices. And I hate to say that because they were really not economy. They were really, they were anti-economy. They were horrible what they were doing to the costs and actually making the car much worse. But these policies forced automakers to build cars using expensive technologies that drove up costs, drove up prices, and made the car much worse.
Now, if you look closely at that video, you'll see the president surrounded by people, including familiar faces right here in Detroit. Ford CEO Jim Farley and Stellantis CEO Anthony Filosa were right there. Farley called the plans, quote, a win for customers and common sense. Major news involving that controversial follow-up strike on an alleged drug-carrying vessel in September. Two sources now telling the Associated Press that the Pentagon knew there were survivors on that boat in the Caribbean, and the military carried out the second strike anyway. Those sources say the rationale for the second strike was they needed to sink the vessel. All 11 people on board died. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth defended the second strike by saying it happened in, quote, the fog of war. He added while he didn't see any survivors, he didn't stay for the rest of the mission, and he gave this reason why.
I watched that first strike live. As you can imagine, at the Department of War, we got a lot of things to do. So I didn't stick around for the hour and 2 hours, whatever, where all the sensitive site exploitation digitally occurs. So I moved on to my next meeting. A couple of hours later, I learned that that commander had made which he had the complete authority to do. And by the way, Admiral Bradley made the correct decision to ultimately sink the boat and eliminate the threat. He sunk the boat, and eliminated the threat.
Now, several legal experts tell the Associated Press they believe the second strike violated peacetime laws. And the Pentagon's own manual on the laws of armed conflict specifically say striking survivors of a sunken ship is patently illegal. All right, to Tennessee now, where Republicans held on to a congressional district in a special election yesterday. Matt Van Epps will represent the district. It's one that traditionally is conservative. So you might be wondering, hey, why are you talking about this anyway? Well, it's because a late burst of national spending and campaigning won it for them, and the margin of victory was less than half of last year's race. As we approach the midterms, frustrations with President Trump and the economy could play a huge role in how people vote next year. Republican strategist Jason Rowe is in Studio C to break it all down for us. That and several other campaigns that he knows well, because this is a man who actually has spent most of his career helping run campaigns and understanding kind of the temperature of what's going on around the country. And so, Jason, it's good to see you. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
What do we make of the numbers? So we know that when we look at the numbers, the Tennessee special election, you go, why are you talking about Tennessee? But it looked like Afton-Bain got a little too close for comfort. 9 points of a spread. President Trump won by 22 points in that district. Talk about what this means.
Listen, there's plenty of reasons for Republicans to be nervous based on that. We shouldn't have had to spend that kind of money. President Trump won it by 22 points. Mark Green, the Republican who had won the seat in 2024 and then retired, which is what triggered this special election, he won it by 21 points. But I think you also got to step back and look at the dynamics around this. This seat is what we would call an R+10, which means in a normal election, a Republican would win that seat by 10 points. Van Epps won by 9 points. So that's a pretty normal outcome. What people are not focusing on is the amount of money that's being spent. So the Democrat in 2024 spent $1.2 million. This Democrat with outside money is going to have spent several $1 million, raising the profile significantly and creating a more competitive race. Where I think Republicans need to be very nervous is, and we know this because we've seen it in other special elections, and to be clear, Republicans have not won a seat they should have won in any of these off-year or special elections. Democrat seats went Democrat, but Republicans did underperform from their historical norms. But where Republicans should be nervous is the enthusiasm on the Democratic side. We know that Trump voters don't always turn out unless Trump's on the ballot, but right now Republicans have been winning. We control the presidency, the Supreme Court, the House, the Senate.
But do you get too comfortable?
Well, I think President Trump has gotten a lot of wins, so they already feel like they're winning, so there's nothing to motivate them in a special election the Tuesday after Thanksgiving. That is, it's a big ask. And I know the Trump organization dumped $1.6 million into that seat in the last 2 weeks of the election this week. But the enthusiasm gap is where we got to be concerned. Democrats are angry. They see the Trump administration trolling them every single day on things big and small, some of the things that you highlighted at the beginning of the show. And I think that we have got to contend with, as Republicans, that Democrats are going to turn out at the highest clip we've seen in a long time for a midterm election.
And let's talk about what it is that drives people to the polls. You say, when Trump is on the ballot, people go to the polls, those Trump Republicans. However, affordability is on the ballot every single time, regardless of who's running in which party. Talk for a moment about what it is that this party has to do, in your mind, to identify the wins and also reason with people who actually think that affordability is somewhat somewhat tough right now.
It is, and the problem that Republicans and the Trump administration are going to face is there's no short-term fixes from public policy that are going to change a lot of these affordability questions. We've got a year until the 2026 election. If someone can show me a policy change that they could enact that's going to lower the cost of health care or housing or energy, I'd be amazed to see something.
What about what happened at the White House today? With him sitting down with auto executives, including Stellantis and CEO Ford, basically saying, hey, we're going to kind of, for consumers, this is going to be a win. When you have someone like Jim Farley saying that to customers out there, isn't that a win for the Trump administration?
But when do people feel it? That's the problem. My point is these could be good policies, but for them to take effect before an election and affect how people behave in an election when they feel like they're treading water just to stay where they were. That's where I say the policy prescriptions won't probably impact people fast enough to make them feel better about their situation.
What about when it comes to people out there who basically look at this and say, you know what, the price of a Thanksgiving turkey, they identify these little things, but in general, if you zoom out and you look at affordability in general, it is, for a lot of people, tough. SNAP benefits, when you talk about SNAP benefits perhaps being compromised for a lot of people out there with these lists that the Democratic lawmakers are saying we don't want to release, what does that do to Republican rural voters out there who may end up being compromised because of that?
Well, that's what we're going to find out, and that's why they've got to figure out some of the fixes on some of these things to make sure that our social safety net still helps the people that need the social safety net. The problem is with SNAP, you had a lot of people that weren't eligible and shouldn't have been receiving benefits, and we're seeing that in a lot of different aspects of government. We see some scandalous things that are happening in Minneapolis with the Somali community. There's a huge fraud investigation of a kind of a network of Somalis who have been fraudulently taking millions of dollars from the state of Minnesota.
But shouldn't the Trump administration and the people who are running in the midterms be concerned that everyday Americans may be hurt because of this political fight? And because of that, they may end up losing some seats.
Well, I think if we don't do something about affordability and convince voters that we are doing something and that we care, and also on health care, I think we're going to have real problems. I think those are the two dominant things right now that we're facing. I do think people, when they do their taxes in the spring, are going to find that they're getting more of a refund, or they owe much less because the tax cuts that the Trump administration implemented. So that'll help with the affordability because they'll have a little more cash in their pockets and their take-home pay.
Do Republicans learn the lesson from Democrats that ignoring a problem and pretending it doesn't exist hurts?
We better, because if we don't address those two issues in particular, I think we're in big trouble.
Jason Rowe, it's always good to see you here on The Pulse. Thanks for joining us here tonight. We're diving into the SNAP benefits battle right after the break. Detroit News columnist Caitlin Buss weighs in on that and the other big political headlines next. You're watching The Pulse on Fox 2. Back now on The Pulse, looking at all things people, power, and politics. Here to talk about a number of topics, including the SNAP benefits battle and the fallout from the shooting of the two National Guard members. Detroit News columnist Caitlin Buss. Always good to see you, Caitlin. Thanks for joining us here.
Great to see you.
Let's begin with the SNAP benefits where we left off with Jason. Your take on, as we head into these midterms, Republicans and Democrats, is this a fight that you think President Trump is making to make a point, or do you think this is something that will actually have a binding effect?
I think there are real problems with SNAP. So I hesitate to say it's just to make a point. I disagree maybe with some of the approach in certain ways, but there are substantial problems with the SNAP program.
What are some of the problems?
And they exploded really under COVID when Biden expanded the eligibility above the rates of inflation, really encouraged able-bodied working adults to get on the program. And he was building on Obama, Bush having done that before. So this is decades of the entitlement system growing. And, SNAP shouldn't be a lifestyle. I mean, we have 1 in 8 Americans on it. That doesn't mean that the people who might get their benefits suspended because of this political fight deserve it, right? So they're kind of caught in the crosshairs here between Dana Nessel and the Trump administration. Unfortunately, when you take money from the federal government, the strings attached come with it. So I disagree to some extent with the demonization, the particular pointing out of immigration. But I think the program overall needs, substantial reform.
What does all of this say about affordability, though? Because the president ran on making sure that things were more affordable than they were under Biden. And if there's this demand for SNAP benefits, what does that say about the current state of the economy?
Yeah, I think Trump has dropped the ball to some extent on his promises on the economy. It's not something he can unilaterally control. But we know that people are hurting. We know that affordability is a huge issue across bipartisan lines. I mean, this doesn't, and across demographics, socioeconomic demographics. So I think he has to take it very seriously. Like Jason was saying, I think if they don't tackle this issue and really show folks they can move the needle and keep inflation down, Republicans are in a very delicate spot right now for the midterms.
You look at these work requirements that have gone into effect, some of them are a little more stringent, also expanding the age. So 18 to 64-year-olds now have to prove that they're working those 80 hours. There's some people who are concerned about people slipping through the cracks. When you write about this and talk to people about it, what do you think about that? I mean, in terms of people out there who may have some mental health issues or perhaps some alcoholic issues or something that's going on that doesn't really quite take them out of the game for work, but still compromises them.
Sure. I think there need to be more maybe creative approaches to how we deal with those individuals. I mean, mental health has become such a crisis, right, over the past 5 years at least. And we hear a lot from community mental health people who say, we don't have the right resources, we don't have the right tools in our bucket. So I think there needs to be kind of a coming together of, safety nets for people in that situation. I don't know that we've seen, so many people in the current situation that we're in today.
The National Guard fallout, first of all, what a tragic shooting. And so many people are just mourning the loss of one of the Guards women out there, and then this Guardsman who's still, in critical care. When you look at the fallout from that, you see Kristi Noem's tweet out there basically saying, hey, we don't want these people here and that kind of a thing. That monolithic swath of talking about people who are the other. Is that something that you think we're going to see more of as we move forward?
I think that's been her approach, and I think it will continue to be her approach. I don't agree with it. I don't think it's right. Some of the policies, Trump was elected to deal with the border. He closed the border. Most people were happy with that. I think everything since the deportations, certainly her tweet, just a lot of her behavior has been questionable. And it bothers me to see so much glee in what they're doing. Whether or not hard policies need to be implemented, to go about it with that attitude is really off-putting to me.
We also have to look at what was off-putting about some of the Biden-era regulations that were in place, including the program in which that suspect was allowed to arrive with 100,000 other Afghan refugees. Not to say that everyone is in that same swath again, but that program obviously kind of allowed a little more of a free range of a welcome. This president is now saying, hey, we got to put the stop on this. So the pause is in effect. How long do you think that pause will last?
I don't know. I'm hoping that a lot of these policies, including, putting National Guard in cities and stuff, I'm hoping that they're short term, because I certainly don't want to see a lot of this be permanent and kind of a permanent mentality. But I do agree there's things that need to be cleaned up, but I would hope it's short.
The first travel ban that went into effect, obviously they ran into a lot of roadblocks and legal battles. Is that what you expect to see happen here as well?
I think we'll probably see that. I think the courts have ruled narrowly kind of on these bans, and so they certainly, there's waivers for, asylum seekers, different individuals like that, and they have chimed in. I think there's a possibility it will be allowed and it will be upheld. We don't know, but I think there will certainly be litigation.
When we talk, kind of zoom out and talk about the midterms, one more for the last question here. The recognition of a problem is something that politicians have a hard time swallowing their pride with. How important is it for Republicans, including the president, to say, we get it, some of you are hurting? I think, that's not Trump's style. I wouldn't expect to see that. I think it could go a long way. I think ever since Trump has come on the stage, the moments where he's presidential, where he is gracious, are his best moments, and that's where he gets more support. I think long term, it's a bad strategy. Unfortunately, I think it's more than a strategy. I think it's kind of a mentality. I would hope to see it change. He could be much more impactful, even though he's being fairly impactful, but he could bring a lot more support along with him. And perhaps some of those policies that don't get the support will get more support if he kind of was a little more easy in some of the ways he talks about the other issues that are harder to talk about. But Caitlin Buss, it's good to see you. Thanks for joining us here on The Pulse. We're keeping the conversation going about SNAP benefits, but from a business perspective after the break, expert Mark Lee is here to talk about that. You're watching The Pulse on Fox 2. Thank you, Caitlin. It is People, Power, and Politics. Welcome back to Detroit's only nightly political talk show. Here to talk about the SNAP benefits battle from a business perspective, business guru Mark Lee. And Mark, it's good to see you. Thanks for joining us here tonight. So we talk about people, power, and politics. We talked about the power and the politics of it. Now we're going to talk about the people. So far, there was a huge sigh of relief, a collective sigh that the SNAP benefit battle was over. But now we're seeing it ramp up again with talk about attorneys general withholding some of the roles of who's on these, SNAP beneficiaries, and the Trump administration saying you won't get your benefits if you don't reveal that. Where is this going to end up?
It's going to end up wherever it ends up. I don't think anybody can predict this, to be honest with you. My concern, quite frankly, is from a people perspective. 40 million people across the country, 1.4 million people across the state of Michigan rely on those benefits just to take care of some of the basic needs when it comes to food. And so if they don't have access to those benefits, there's an economic impact to the country at large in terms of people not spending money. And quite frankly, they just can't take care of some of their basic needs. So we don't know where it's going to end at this point. It may end up somewhere in the middle. I understand why they made some of the changes. They want to make sure that people are not taking advantage of the program. But at the end of the day, people are trying to survive.
Now, I know that the vast majority of people are trying to survive. For those who, I guess, not slip through the cracks, but enter through the cracks to try to take advantage of our program, and the Trump administration says our job is to root out waste and fraud. Do you believe that that could help the overall economy by taking off the rolls people who don't deserve the money?
No, I don't agree with that. I think it could certainly, you need a better program, right, where people can benefit, well, obviously to reduce that fraud. Can it impact the economy? Yes, it can impact it, but to what extent, we don't know that yet, right? Because we have 40 million people on this program, $180 a month. For them, that's a lot of dollars. For the U.S. economy, that's a blip in the overall, the bigger picture, if you will. So I think it could.
Yeah, the U.S. economy is like a $30 trillion economy.
Yeah, so at the end of the day, this is a blip. It's a blip on the radar screen. So what impact is it going to have? I really don't know. I think it's going to have a bigger impact on the people who may have those benefits taken from them.
When we look at this political fight, I know you're a business guy, not a politics guy, but everything crossroads at politics.
Absolutely.
So when you look at these attorneys general, including Dana Nessel, who essentially is saying, hey, I don't necessarily want to give up the roles of the people that are on this list. What do you make of that?
I agree with that.
Why is that?
I mean, I think that, she's talking about getting information, personal information. And I know the information is supposed to be protected, but people are wary. They're leery of giving up that information. The states are leery of giving it up because they don't know, for whatever reasons, how those dollars might be withheld. Based on what? Based on Social Security numbers, based on where I live, based on the amount of money I'm earning. I mean, there's a lot of people who are concerned about giving up that information to the federal government. That will always be there. And I think what Dana Nessel is doing...
Doesn't the federal government already have all of that information?
You would think they would have that information, but the question is, how is it really going to be used? And I think that's where the distrust factor is they do have the information, all of us, let's be honest about it, but the question is, how is it going to be used? I think that's where there's a level of trepidation.
When you look at, we talked to the Lighthouse Michigan, and so many other food banks out there.
Yeah.
You talk about the economic impact. If, for whatever reason, SNAP benefits are suspended, even for a few weeks again, what happens to people who really need this food, and what happens to our economy here at home?
What we got to do is, people are going to be going to these food banks. They're going to be going to the Gleaners of the world, I'll be in downtown Detroit and other food banks across Metro Detroit. You're going to see a significant increase in demand for those products. In terms of the economic impact, people are not going to be spending money because they're not going to have the money at the grocery stores, right? They're going to be certainly looking for free food, quite frankly. And I think the bottom line is people have to continue to give to these food banks. They have to continue to help these people, these individuals. Organizations, nonprofit organizations need to give back as well. So we're going to see an increase in overall demand this holiday season and beyond.
I think it's interesting because you bring up a really interesting point. It's not just about, which is the worst part, people not being able to have food on their tables.
Yes.
But you're saying there's an overall economic impact and a trickle-down effect that happens overall in our economy in Michigan.
Absolutely. If you don't have people spending money, ultimately that ties into tax dollars, that ultimately ties into people's jobs. And so while we think that, we go into a grocery store, we see people there. But at the end of the day, if the demand is down, if people are not spending money, the economic impact does extend to the stores, to the street levels, to economic development, taxes, and everything else. So yeah, there's a huge impact beyond just those people not getting the food as well.
Yeah, and these are our neighbors. I think today it was Dave Coulter with Oakland County talking about something like, a pretty large chunk of people in Oakland County who they're housing insecure. We always think about certain places, oh, that's not going to affect our neighbors. These are our friends and neighbors, family members, and we have to look out for them, regardless of what's happening in the political sphere out there. But Mark Lee, it's always good to see you. Thanks for joining us here.
Thank you, my pleasure.
Great to have you
Absolutely.
on The Pulse, as usual. That is The Pulse for tonight. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm Roop Raj. As always, it was good to be with you. And remember, if you're able to, even though Giving Tuesday is over, give to the local food banks, give to Forgotten Harvest, to Gleaners, to Lighthouse, whoever you can, and help out as we kind of tread through some uncertain times. Thanks so much for joining us. Have a great night.